Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. So just to get things started here, I'm going to be talking a little bit about ECAP and who we are and what we do before I hand things over to our speaker, Justina. So we're really excited to have you all here today for our first recap of the year. So my name is Stacy Gadd, and I'm with the Environmental Assistance Branch at Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection. I'm kind of the new-ish outreach coordinator for the ECAP team. So before we get going today, just a little bit of housekeeping. So first things first, if you can hear me, then we're on the right track. So we should pretty much be set from there. I've got everybody muted, and I think I've got it set to have cameras off for this meeting. If we have questions at the end, I can unmute people as needed. But we just don't want to have too much kind of white noise or background noise going on. With that being said, I also want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and I'll be working to send it out as well as the PowerPoint slides within the next few days here. The webinar is going to be available on YouTube, on the department's YouTube page after we get it all sent out to you attendees and the people who registered. So a little bit about ECAP. So ECAP stands for Environmental Compliance Assistance Program. If you take anything away from my little intro about us today, it's that we're just genuinely here to help. The program itself has two main objectives, the first of which being to help businesses understand and comply with Kentucky's environmental requirements, and the second is to provide free and confidential assistance to Kentucky's businesses. ECAP is Kentucky's Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, or SBEAP, SBEAP for short. SBEAPs are a requirement of the Clean Air Act, so we are primarily funded by facilities' air emission fees. And for that reason, we specialize in providing air quality assistance to small businesses in Kentucky. Small businesses are, for our purposes, are those that are less than 100 employees, are independently owned and operated, and are not a major source of air emissions. One of ECAP's major duties is to provide technical assistance. And as I mentioned in the last slide, we specialize in small business assistance and specifically with questions related to air quality. Some of this technical assistance includes doing site visits, doing potential emission calculations, and even sometimes developing entire applications for small businesses, including filling out required forms. We can also develop record keeping and reporting spreadsheets for air permit requirements, for example, rolling total spreadsheets. Kentucky has opted to make our SBEAP program multimedia, so where some other states focus on just air quality, we also help answer questions about water and waste as well. We staff a phone and email hotline to take in requests from facilities and the general public, and we can provide general assistance in several ways in several water and waste topics, generally things like KPDES permits and hazardous waste, like today. So for some areas like solid waste, we mostly act as a referral service to subject matter experts. We can help facilities identify if regulations may be relevant and recommend that they review certain regulations to identify applicability for their operation. We also assist with new economic development projects, helping them to identify potentially applicable permits. We can also help companies new to Kentucky get into meeting with like the Division of Air Quality, the Division of Waste Management, and the Division of Water all at once, rather than going through each one of those individually. So last but certainly not least, ECAP also develops educational documents for the public, which can include everything from a quick one-page fact sheet on new regulations or regulation changes to 80-page compliance documents that cover pretty much every potential regulation a facility in a specific sector might need to be concerned with. And all of those documents are housed online in our resource library on our website. We also hold training events like this one today. Along with ECAP Recap webinar series, we also host our Air, Water, and Waste 101 series, which is an introductory level workshop regarding air, water, and waste regulations. And those are held in the fall. So we've talked about what ECAP can do, but what ECAP doesn't do is just as important. So ECAP does not issue notices of violations or NOVs. Even if issues are seen during a site visit, we don't make any sort of regulatory determination or give requirements. We make recommendations to facilities. We have no regulatory authority. So like I said in the beginning, we're really just here to help. We also do not interfere with any inspector activity or anything covered in an inspection report. Our enforcement discretion does not supersede any of that. ECAP cannot act solely as corrective action or remedial measure following an inspection report or an NOV, but we can assist a facility meet the requirements, but ECAP can't be the sole remedial measure. So I mentioned a few other things. I mentioned a few times now that our services are confidential and we do not report on potential violations outside of a few exceptions. The department did create an enforcement discretion policy for the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program, and the important part of this discretion is that facilities that work with us at ECAP are given a reasonable opportunity to correct violations before they're brought to regulatory agencies. So we have a few more recaps coming up in the beginning of the next couple of months. More details on those will be made available on our website, and you can subscribe to our blog, Simplifying Compliance, to get email notifications about some more details when we have those. Next month, we're going to be talking about the Division of Water and how they monitor the health of Kentucky's waterways and why that's so important. So, and with all that being said, if you have any additional questions about ECAP or any of the services we offer, feel free to reach out to our hotline that I mentioned earlier. Sounds like we've got an issue with mute here. Let's see. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the hotline that I mentioned. And the number and email goes directly to our ECAP staff members, and we'd love to help you out. And that's all I have for today. So next I'd like to welcome Ms. Justina Bascom. She's with the Division of Waste Management as an Environmental Control Supervisor. So I'll hand it over to you, Justina.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to see everyone on here today. I am Justina Bascom, as Stacy mentioned, a supervisor for the administrative support section within the hazardous waste branch. So it is my section that pretty much deals with generator registrations and annual reports, which is what we will be going over today. I do have a presentation for us where I will go through almost each form page by page and kind of give you some insight on what we're looking for. And since it is annual report season, we will have a few extra important dates and updates for some of that information. So let me get my presentation up here. All right. Now, is that showing up for everyone?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. So I will not see the chat because I'm not on my computer with the two screens. So I will kind of have a section at the end for questions along with some frequently asked questions that I will already have answered in here. But please feel free to drop those in the chat as you get them and we'll address them towards the end. All right. So again, a little bit of what we'll be going over is exactly what do you need to submit when you're sending your forms in to our branch? What exactly are you submitting and why? Okay, so if any of you are familiar with the EPA 8700 form, so Kentucky is a state that is an authorized state, so we do handle our generator registrations and permits on a state level for a federal program. We do use the EPA's form, and then we have addendums. We do ask for a little more information than what EPA requires, so we do have our addendum forms. So when you see 8700-12, -13 A or B, and -23, what exactly is that for? So if you're submitting an 8700-12, that is your generator registration. That is you telling us, hey, I am a generator, I generate hazardous waste, and all of the things that are included with that. The 8713 is for annual reports. Kentucky is a state that requires annual reporting if you are a small or large quantity generator. And then for the 8723, that is for our actual permitting. So if you are a TSD permitted facility, you'll be seeing and using the EPA 8723 more than anyone else would, because that is specific for our TSDs. So also, what's the difference between all of these? Pretty much it's the addendums. The site ID page, which is about the first 6 pages, is up to the signature section. That's just information on the site. There is a lot of yes or no questions, whether or not it applies to your facility. But then the addendums that come with it are really what makes the form different. So if you have hazardous secondary material or an episodic event, those will go with the 8700-12. If you're submitting your annual report, then you will see the GM, the WR, the OI, and then if you are a TSD, you will see the permit part A. We'll be going over all of these. So to start, you'll see the site ID form. Again, this is everything that you can tell us about the site. Where is it? Do you already have an EPA ID number for your location? Your mailing address, if it is different, whether you're a private, tribal, state-owned, city-owned, anything like that. All of that information is captured on the site ID form. And this also here for your reason for submittal, that is the very first thing as to what we're going to be looking for. Why are you submitting this form? So if you are registering as a generator, whether it's your renewal, a modification, or brand new, you are obtaining or updating your EPA ID number for ongoing regulated activities. That really long first checkbox is usually what we would see. If you are submitting your annual report, that second option is submitting as a component for the hazardous waste report for whatever year. And then this form is also used when you are notifying that you're not going to be continuing activity. So if you are a large quantity generator going through closure, you will also have to submit this form. So depending on what you choose in number 1 is what we'll be assuming it's for and looking for the proper addendums. This next page here, you will see this is the site contact and owner operator information. Your site contact is who we will reach out to if we have questions, comments, concerns about anything that we see on the form. So when we go through our review and we're looking for corrections, clarifications, this is the person that we will reach out to. So if your company president is not the person to answer all those questions, do not put them here. You want to put the person that will answer their emails, check their mail if it is something that does have to get sent through our USPS. But this person is the one who can answer questions for us and also submit your forms. Then, of course, your legal operator or legal owner and operator information. This doesn't necessarily have to be someone who wants to be contacted, but we do need to know who owns the location, not the company. So sometimes if it's a leased property, if it is, just a parent company versus a smaller portion, however that looks for your company, that is perfectly fine. We just need to know who owns the actual property that this is occurring at. And then, of course, your legal operator, that is who generates and manages the waste that is generated at the location. Small little note here, this is something that we NOD for, that is notice of deficiency for quite a bit. That checkbox only is for the location, address.
I apologize. I think there was a bit of a technical hiccup there. You should be able to start sharing again, Justina.
Okay, it said that I couldn't talk anymore. I'm like, hey, all right, let's get back to it. Okay, yes, so I believe I was here with the owner operator. Um, though that checkbox is specifically for the address, you still do have to put in the name and the date became owner operator, owner type, things like that, and of course the contact information that is available. This is where we start to get into what is actually occurring at the site. Are you a generator? That is going to be the first question. If you are a generator, you will then fill out whether you are a large, small, or very small quantity generator. If you are not a generator, this is an option for you to check no. What case would you be a non-generator? Are transporters, transfer facilities, and sometimes different situations where you have activity on site, but you're not generating, that is still an option. Um, this is also where you let us know if you are a TSD. This is not the same as authorized treatment on site. We do see that box checked quite a bit for some of our generators that are authorized to treat on site. However, this is not the same. This is also where you would let us know what your hazardous waste codes are and if whatever applies. So if you have 6 waste streams and they have different waste codes, you would just compile them all in this section 10B here. Our state waste codes start with N. There's pretty much only one site that truly uses those. So if you know that that does not apply, this is one of those situations where you can leave that blank and it'd be perfectly fine. A little more for the site ID form. This is again all of the yes or no questions or for any additional activity. If you are a transporter or trader, exporter, if you have universal waste activities, used oil activities, if you are opting into subpart P or subpart K, you would put all of this here. If you are a very small quantity generator or a small quantity generator and you are using your allotted episodic generator event for that calendar year, this is where you would check yes and then also include the applicable addendum, which we'll get to also. Number 15 on this page is actually also if for those large quantity generators that are going through site closure, whether it is the entire facility or just one of your accumulation areas. And then the last page of that site ID form here is a few more yes or no questions, and then a comment section. That comment section is really helpful because you can give us some insight to something that may be confusing on your sheet or your registration, and you can preemptively kind of explain some of that to us in that comment section. So if your landowner has a foreign address, the way the forms are set up, it's looking for a US address. So if the address and how you need to put it in there does not fit, you can put it in the comment section and give us the correct address. If there are more than one owners, if this is a modification, episodic event, for the case of an annual report. So if you are a small quantity generator or a large quantity generator and you over report, but you did not generate for that year, you can let us know here and then we will not be looking for the additional addendums, but you do have to submit a report. And then finally, for the site ID page is your certification. This was where you would have the signature for your owner, operator, or authorized representative and their contact information. We do try to include the signer or certifier here when we send out correspondence, such as your certificate. We more than likely wouldn't include you in clarification emails like such as the notice of deficiency, but we will include you if we do need to contact and aren't getting responses back. So again, there are addendums and you only submit them if they're applicable. So if you do not have hazardous secondary material, you do not need to send a blank form that says not applicable. Just don't send it at all. This form is actually a new form, this Appendix A. It's for additional contacts. We do understand that there are some cases where there is a team effort for our larger facilities, and one person may not be able to answer right away, so you need multiple people to receive that correspondence. This is where you can start to include additional people for us to reach out if there is a notice of deficiency or if we're sending our renewal notices and annual report reminders. This addendum here is for notification of hazardous secondary material. This is if you manage excluded hazardous secondary material. You submit it during your registration so that we know that that is included as part of your generator status. But you also would want to include this in your annual report to show your exclusions when it comes to your assessments, because for anything that is listed or that counts for hazardous secondary material, you do not include that on a GM form. So if you did generate waste, you want to let us know and have that included. However, you wouldn't put it on a GM form for your report. This here is the episodic generator addendum. There are two ways to have an episodic event, planned or unplanned. You are only allowed one event per calendar year, and you can petition for a second event as long as it is not the same as a prior event. So if you used your planned event for 2026, early January, and you then have an unplanned situation later in the year, you can petition for that event as long as it is not the same waste and not the same event. For planned episodic events, you want to make sure that you give us a 30-day notice, and it has to be sent in advance of the generation, and you have 60 days to remove it off-site. For unplanned events, let us know within 72 hours of the event. So if you had a product recall, production upset, acts of nature. I know a few years ago we did have those tornadoes that came through, and that changed a lot of waste for a lot of folks. We did have more of a blanket situation, notification allotment for that. But if there were acts of nature, you would just let us know that that affected your facility and that you had an episodic event, you have waste that's unexpected, and we can then receive the forms at a later date. But that notification period is what is really important for episodic generators. If you do not submit this, you will then just have to modify your generator status to whatever it would be for the amount of waste you generated in that single month. This is another addendum. This is the LQG consolidation of VSQGs. This is for VSQGs that are under the control of the same entity. They may be around the city, but they're not contiguous, but they can all send their waste to the LQG location for waste disposal. This way, each site does not have to register and have its own separate ID. And then on this form, you can copy it multiple times if you do have more than the 3 that is here, but you want to provide the information for all of the VSQG locations. One situation that we have, that I at least have seen so far, are some of our bigger universities that take up a good chunk of the city. You might have satellite locations or can't think of the other word right now, but where you have multiple buildings and things that are a part of the university, but they're not on the main campus. Okay, our next form, this is the GM, which is the Waste Generation and Management form. This is where you will tell us what you generated. So if you had on-site generation in the calendar year for which you are reporting, so with this being a report year, your reports are due March 1st of this year, but you're reporting on everything you generated in 2025. So you would let us know what your waste description is. It does not have to be the exact full-length description of what is on the manifest. I know that is sometimes easier to include, so that you don't have to figure out a easier way to describe it. But if it's just paint waste, you can say paint waste. You don't have to put the super long DOT description. Here for you would list all the waste codes that are associated and then all of the other codes. This list of codes can be found in the full 8700 form document. For anyone that is not familiar with it, it is about 130 to 140 pages, because that form does go question by question for each form on if it's applicable and how to fill it out and where to get that information. There are also a lot of resources in there, the full code lists and everything like that. So that is where you would find your source, country code, management code, things like that. For the remainder of the information, after you tell us what the waste you generated was, you then tell us what you did with it. If you are a facility that does have treatment on site, you will let us know that you treated it and did whatever you did with it on site. Or if you sent it off site, you would fill in question number 3. And then if there are any comments, again, there is a section here for that. You do have to do a separate GM form for every single waste stream that you have. There are some situations where they can be combined. So if you sent the same waste to multiple locations, here on number 3 is where you can put the multiple locations without having separate GM forms. But if the waste has a different source code or different form code, they cannot be included on the same form. So you will submit multiple copies of this GM form for each of the waste that you have. The WR form are for the facilities that receive waste. So if you receive anything to your location that you then do something with, whether it's treat, store, anything like that, you would include the WR form. And this is again for everything that you received during that reporting year. The offsite identification form, this is where you will give us the information for the transporters and the receiving facilities. So you will have to, at a minimum, have 2 sites listed at all times, unless, again, different situations. But you should at least have your primary transporter that took everything from your site to the receiving facility, and then you should have your receiving facility. There are some receiving facilities that are also transporters. So again, that would be the only option where you would only have 1. But if that is not the case, you should have at least a bare minimum of 2 sites listed on your OI form. This is another one that you can copy multiple times if you have more than 3 sites. So we'll get into some of our Kentucky addendums. We do have some for the annual reports and for the registration. So for your annual report addendum, a lot of this information is redundant, but the forms are still required if you use the paper copies. So again, this is very much like the site ID form. And so when you see here the title, Hazardous Waste Annual Report Addendum, and then in parentheses underneath EPA Form 8713, that is because this corresponds to that form. It is not a replacement, but it corresponds. So it's an addendum, you have to submit it with that. And here is where on question number 4, we ask some of those additional questions that we as the state of Kentucky want to know. So if did you have an episodic event? Did your status change throughout the year? Fuel burner, are you a large quantity universal waste handler, things like that. And then again, another comment section if you need to clarify anything. Form number 2 corresponds to all of our GM forms. So this one, you will submit a Form 2 with each GM form. And again, a lot of that information is redundant, but there are a few things on here that are not requested on the GM form, such as the solid or liquid waste. And then if you do have a general description versus the manifest description of your waste. Here are forms 3 through 5. Form 3 will correspond with the WR form. So again, if you have WR forms that you submit, you then have to submit Form 3. If you do not submit a WR, you do not submit Form 3. Again, all of these are as applicable. Form 4 and Form 5 correspond with the OI forms. So Form 4 specifically is for if you send that waste offsite, this is where you would again list your transporters, the total number of manifests, the pounds per year, and then your primary transporter. One of the main bits of information that is different on this particular form are your container types. So you will need to include what type of container it was sent out in. Was it a drum? Was it a pallet? Things like that. And then Form 5 is if you received waste. So you would list who sent waste as the generator and then the primary transporter that brought it from the site to you. We do know that sometimes especially with the way that some of our incinerators and other TSDs are across the country, you'll have waste to go to a transfer facility, then a different transporter, and then a different transfer facility. We only need to know the first transporter on your report. This form here is the claim for exclusion. This is if you have excluded waste. And question number 2 helps you identify the waste that are subject to exclusion. So if you have special waste or if you have wastewater that is subject to either Section 402 or 307B of the Clean Water Act, based on how it's removed from your site, you can include that, and then you still will put it on a GM and include it in your report, but you do not have to pay the assessment on waste that is excluded. And of course, number 3, you do have to let us know why you think it's excluded. If it's not included with your addendum form, like that description is not included, we will deny it and then ask you for the remainder of your assessment, which would include the fees for that. This is the DEP 7070, which is our assessment return. This is where you would list out all of the quantities of whichever category of waste that you had. If you look on here, I'm not sure if it's, zoomed in enough for you yet, but number 2A through 3B is solid waste, and then 4A through 5B is liquid waste. And the various ways that you disposed of it after generating it, whether you treated it on site, sent it off site, or if it was handled by an industrial boiler or furnace for energy recovery. You would let us know where it falls. If you do have any of the energy recovery options, that is for the code, I believe it's HO50. You do have to include the certificate saying that it was handled that way. There is a certification that you should be able to receive to show that that is how your waste was handled. And you would calculate your fees based on the quantity for each line. And then this is also where number 6 you would include all of your waste that is excluded from your exclusions form. So if you did have any waste excluded, you will tally that up and just put that there. You can see that it's grayed out, so you actually don't multiply it by column B. But you do want to include that on there because when we go through our review and start tallying everything to make sure it all matches and is correct, we'll be looking for that information. Here is where your annual reports are due in our office by March 1st of the report year. Anything received March 2nd and later start to receive late fees and penalties. And this is after your subtotal. So if your subtotal is about $47, but you don't submit it until like August, you will have late fees dating back to January 1st that you will then have to apply. And when you get to your total in number 11, if it's over $50, you do have to pay that assessment. If your assessment is under 50 after applicable late fees, you still don't have to make that assessment payment. Okay, here is the registration of hazardous waste activity addendum, the DWM 7037A. This is what you would submit with your 8700-12 for registrations. Again, whether it's a renewal, a new ID, if you forgot to submit and your ID expired and was deactivated, you have to reactivate the ID. Or if you're submitting a modification, you will include you include all of your hazardous waste activities. So there's question number 5. Again, that would correspond to some of the information that is on the 8700. And then you will list out your waste streams. So when you list out your waste streams, in the example there, it says paint related waste material. You include the EPA waste codes that are associated with that particular waste stream, the physical state, your monthly maximum, your annual, and then of course what your unit of measure is. We prefer pounds because that is kind of how we have to calculate things and report things in. However, if you use gallons or anything like that, if you do not include your density, we will use the default density of water to calculate what your pounds are for that. Again, for your maximum amount for a calendar month, that is the number that is used to determine your generator status. It is not how much you do annually, and you cannot take the estimated annual and divide it by 12 and get that number. That's not what you're supposed to do. If you're not sure and that's just how you can estimate what you generate, then that's what you can do. But if you end up generating more than that, you do have to then modify your registration to correct those numbers. This is also the opportunity for if it's a modification where you're no longer handling a certain waste stream and would like to remove it for your registration, you would submit that in question number 7. Okay, here's a copy of our fee schedule. So we have schedules 1, 2, and 3. 1 is for basic generator registrations. If you are a very small quantity generator or VSQG, there is a flat fee of $200 regardless of how many waste streams you have. So you can have 1, you can have 30, as long as you're still under your 220 pound per month allotment for that status level. If you submit multiple registrations together, so if you have 2 or 3 facilities and they all are registered and expire within the same month, and you can submit their registrations together, the first one is $200, and then the remainder of them have a discounted rate of $150. If you are a small or large quantity generator, it's based on your number of waste streams, and it goes up in increments of 5 waste streams and then increments of $50 in the fee. So if you have 1 to 5 waste streams, your fee would be $300. If you have 11 to 15, your fee would be $400. it does kind of cap out at $600. So if you are a facility that has 67 waste streams, you'll only be paying the 600. You will not increase that again by the fives. Schedule 2 is where we have our modification fees. So if you are submitting a registration and need to make changes outside of your general annual renewals, this is where these fees apply. You don't pay modification fees during renewals or during new registrations. So if you need to change your waste streams, those also go up in increments of 5. If you need to change your contact information, because the contact information that was mentioned for the site ID form, that person that is listed, if they are no longer the correct person and you now are and you need that information changed, you have to submit a modification for that. We can't just go in and change names. We have to have that correct documentation showing that. If your facility was one generator status needs to change, whether you go up or down, you would submit a modification for that. And then if you are deleting activities such as recycling, treatment on site from your registration, that is also under our modification. Schedule 3 is where we have other activities. So if you are a generator and generator only, you don't have anything else going on, you'll likely only see the fees in Schedule 1. However, if you are a recycler, transporter, or anything in addition to your generator status registration, you would check this schedule for the fees that are associated with that. Some of them are annual fees, some are one-time fees, and some are per activity. So if you are a recycler, that is one of our per activity fees. And so is treatment on site. I don't see that on there. Maybe I'm missing it. Oh yeah, one on-site treatment of generator, that is also a per activity fee. There are a couple scenarios here under Schedule 3. So one example is if your company is a large quantity generator with 7 waste streams and operates a precious metal recycling facility, your annual fee for the generation is $350 for Schedule 1, and then you would also pay the recycler fee for Schedule 3.
That's all right. It'll all work out.
So that is where, oops. There we go. So that is where you would find your total, which would be $650. Also, all checks, if you do submit your forms through paper, have to be made payable to the Kentucky State Treasurer, but you have to send them to us. Sometimes we get checks that are made out to, Hazardous Waste Branch, the Energy and Environment Cabinet. We cannot process those, and we'll send those back. That can and more than likely will delay review and renewal or issuance of your ID number. So make sure that if you are using checks that you make them payable to Kentucky State Treasurer, but you are mailing those in with your forms. Okay, I'm going to go over really quickly a few frequent items that receive a notice of deficiency, not to be confused with notice of violation. So an NOD is not an NOV. It does not have any negative or bad repercussions to it. That is us reaching out for additional information. For example, if your waste codes don't match, so on the 8710B, where you have to list out all of your waste codes, and then on your DWM 7037, where you have to list all of your waste streams and then the waste codes that are associated with each stream. If we notice that they do not match, we will reach out and to make sure what's correct is, are they just missing from the whole list on 10B, or did you accidentally choose the wrong one for one of your waste streams? So we will reach out for correction and clarification on that. Your generator status does not match your monthly totals because again, it is not your annual generation, it is your monthly. So in a single month, what do you generate? That is your generator status. So if you check very small quantity generator, but you have 257 pounds listed as the total for your waste streams, that does not match because your waste streams say you're small, but you checked very small. A hazardous waste activity is checked on the DWM 7037, but is not on the 8700. So further example, if you select that you have recycler activity on, I'm sorry, I have a typo there, the DWM 7037A, but you do not have recycler checked on the 8700 form, we will reach out to you about that and double check that one wasn't checked, one was supposed to be checked, whichever way that goes. A couple things that we get asked frequently. Who is a generator? So this is the definition. A generator means a person by site whose act or process produces hazardous waste identified or listed in 40 CFR Part 261, or whose act first causes hazardous waste to become subject to regulation. That is the definition of a generator of hazardous waste. Is it okay if I don't get my registration in by the 15th? So all registrations are handled on a monthly basis, as opposed to the annual reports that are due on the 1st of March. So if your registration expires January 31st, 2026, you should have submitted your renewal forms by December 15th of 2025. So 45 days prior to expiration. Now, it is highly advised to meet that deadline if you can. If you are off by a day or so, that is still okay. My take on that 45-day thing is before we switched to a lot of our electronic options, that had to be done by mail. So we wanted to make sure that all of that got submitted on time and gives us ample time for review so that your facility does not have an expired certificate while we are trying to review your new registration that was submitted too close to or after your expiration date. So hard deadline, not exactly, but as close to that date as you possibly can. What do I need to do if I change generator status or add waste streams? You would submit your forms. Modifications, again, are submitted using the same forms as your renewal or as a new, but your modification fees from Schedule 2 of our fee schedule are what will apply. And same thing, if you need to change anything, it is all the same forms and Schedule 2 fees apply. For the facilities that are closing and you no longer need your EPA ID number, how do you deactivate that? If you are a large quantity generator, site closures and deactivation of the ID requires clean closure per 40 CFR 262.17A8, which also requires an inspection, and that is handled by our field office. So you would submit your 8700 30 days prior so that there can be an inspection scheduled, and then we can close out your EPA ID number. If you are a small or very small quantity generator, there is a one-page form that is the request to be removed, the DWM 7086, and you would just submit that, letting us know that you are no longer generating or you are no longer at that location, whatever the case may be, and we will deactivate that ID. So who must file annual reports in Kentucky? Any large quantity generators and small quantity generators must file an annual report. Very small quantity generators are not required to submit them unless they were an SQG or LQG at any point during the report year. So if you modify down to a very small, but you were a small, you still have to submit your report for that year. So is the annual report the same as the annual registration? No. I like to explain it in two ways. Well, your annual registration, if you look at a budget sense, is what you plan to do for the year. And then your annual report is what you did do for the year. So when you register and you receive your certificate, you're telling us that this is what I plan to do for this upcoming year. When you submit your annual report, you're telling us this is what I did. These are all of the numbers that I generated for that year. So they are not the same and they cannot replace each other. So if you submit an annual report with all of those addendums, again, remember those are different addendums, it will not apply. So when are annual reports due? With all technicality, annual reports are due January 1st of every year. However, there is a grace period that allows through March 1st before any late fees apply. So reports received after March 1st, those late fees will date back to January 1st. So if you send in your report and we receive it on March 3rd, your late fees will apply through starting on January 1st. So make sure that you are giving yourself ample time to send those in on time to avoid late fees. How do you calculate your late fees and penalties? There is a formula to calculate those in the instructions for your assessment return, which is located on our forms page. If you use the electronic form or e-form, that calculates that for you based on the day that you're submitting, because it does apply up until the date that we receive it. What are the fees and where are they listed? Again, I showed you a copy of that fee schedule and the assessment return. Those forms are found on our forms webpage. So if you go to our page and you find forms, they are PDFs or Word documents that are listed on that page. Can I pay my fees online? Initial online payments are what's accepted through the electronic form. So if you are still using paper copies, you have to send us a paper check. We can create a minimal amount of invoices for additional fees if needed, but initial submittals require you to use your electronic forms. Where do I mail my forms and where do I mail the check? Please do not send them separately. But you make them payable to Kentucky State Treasurer and then you send them to our office. If you have Division of Waste Management, Hazardous Waste Branch, 300 South Boulevard, second floor, it will reach us. You do not have to have a specific person to have it to attention of a specific person. Can I upload forms to the e-portal? No. Any electronic submissions have to go through eForm 108, and that does not have an upload option. You do have to fill in the forms based on how that form works to then input that data into our system. And which eForm do I use? You have to use 108. There is another eForm that says Division of Waste Management, but that is not to be used for your forms for your registrations or reports. And here we are with a couple updates that I want to run through really quickly. So if you're not aware, we have opted into RCRA Info Biennial Report software. So if you are a large quantity generator or were a large quantity generator for 2025, you can use RCRA Info to submit your report. You do not have to use the e-form or send in paper copies if you are using that. If you are a large quantity generator, I do have a couple dates for you to include. This is one of those situations where we will have an option for an invoice because you're using RCRA Info software, and that doesn't allow for payments. So the last day to request that is February 25th. Invoices must like run overnight. So to make sure that you have time to pay them on time, the last day to request that for this year is February 25th. If you are mailing things in, we should receive them by February 27th. Because March 1st this year is a Sunday, so anything after the 27th is essentially late, unless you're using the electronic versions that you can submit up until, 11:59 on the 1st. As long as it doesn't say the 2nd or later, it'll be considered on time. Also, beginning of January last year, LQGs and SQGs are required to maintain an account on Record Info because of the e-manifest changes that we have. So make sure that you have someone associated with your facility that has those permissions. Yeah, and let's see, do I have anything else? No, I think that is all that I have for y'all today. I will take questions as time allows, but again, here's my contact information. I am not one of the reviewers, however, that I am the section supervisor, so I can answer many of the questions that you have. Or if you send questions to me, I may forward you onto your reviewer if it is a little more site specific or review specific, because our e-forms don't really tell you who your reviewer is. So if you don't know who that is, I will be happy to forward your contact information to them. But I will stop sharing for a moment if there are any questions.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a few in the chat. Do you want me to read those off to you, Justina, or are you going to pull it up?
I have that up, so let's go. There is quite a few in there. All right. Let's see. Explain why it's important to have the date and submittal date prior to the same date to avoid the submittal being rejected as incomplete. I'm not I think the question here is on the e-form. The way that the e-form works is that it will not let you have a day other than the day you're submitting it, because of that certification statement. So it can't be predated and it can't be future dated. Like, it has to be the day that you're like, yes, I certify. That is just how the e-form was put together. So the day that you submit is the day that should be on the certification statement. So I hope that answers your question, Mary.
Yeah, I just wanted other folks to hear it in case they ran into the same thing that we kept running into until you helped us figure it out, because we didn't know why it kept kicking it back. So
Okay, yes. Thank you for that. Yeah, so if your form does not allow you to move forward, one of the common issues is that you started it and signed it on one day and then you tried to submit on another day, and that's not one of those bits of information that everyone will think will give them an error. So definitely consider checking every single field for those red error messages. Okay, can we still use the e-forms to submit hazardous waste annual reports? Absolutely. Right now, e-forms is our preferred option unless you are a large quantity generator submitting your reports. Because if you do not submit them through Record Info, we do have to manually do that. That takes a lot of time and power, like manpower to get done, and if it's already being typed up by someone, why would we do it a second time? So if you can use Record Info, if you are a large quantity generator, that is appreciated, but the electronic forms is still an option. So the GM forms, if you are submitting through eForms 141, will that be accepted? And when will the new S codes be accepted? That is actually a good question. We have to go. We now have to go through we have to go through IT whenever we need to change the form. So again, those comment sections, if you do have an issue, is the best place to tell us, hey, this is the correct code that I need to use, and we can make those changes on our end during review. I know it's not ideal, but that's kind of what we have to work with when we have our e-forms and when EPA makes changes. Is HSM activity also reported on the state forms? I do not believe so. I think we only have the HSM addendum. There are no questions on any of our forms about HSM. I mentioned grouping wastes. Can you group waste with the same waste code? For example, methanol and isopropyl alcohol both have D001. Would one waste stream labeled raw material be acceptable? Are you talking about your annual report here or your actual waste stream? Because if it is a different waste stream, it should be listed as different waste streams. Now, if you are shipping them out together, then those can be put together on the same GM form.
Okay, thank you, Justina.
All righty. Let's see. So can you confirm generator status in the 8700-12 is the facility's current generator status, not the generator status of the reporting year? For example, the site was an LQG in 25. Yes, you are correct. So if you are submitting your annual report on the 8700, you should be putting your current status, not the previous status. There was a bit of confusion for us in the past, but we did get that confirmed by Record Info staff that that is how that should be reported. So we are making that note as we review this year. So thank you for that, Michelle. Do we need to modify the registration if we were LQG and generated more than what we planned? No, LQGs are probably the only one that if your quantity is higher than expected, there's no higher status than a large quantity. If you have new waste that you need to add, like different waste streams, that you do need to modify and add. Because then when you do your report, we're going to find those missing, and then you have to go back and make edits and pay additional registration fees to correct some things. So it's best to do that if you know you have new waste or additional waste streams. But if the quantity just goes from 1,000 to 2,000, but it's the same waste, you don't have to modify that. All right. Our renewal has previously been in July and August. Do we now have to renew before March 1st? No, your renewal is not the same as your annual report. So your renewal will remain in the month that it expires, and your report, if you are small or large, is what is due in March 1st. If the totals submitted on the 7037 form are exceeded, did you say a modification form needs to be submitted? Yeah, so if you are going up in generator status, so if you go from 220 pounds to even 250, you are now a small, and you will have to modify to become a small unless that you have a qualifying episodic event. If we are SQG with two waste streams and we're to remove condense to one and then add another, so you would still have two waste streams, would you be paying a mod fee? Yes, because you will be deleting one and adding one. But remember that also is in increments of 5, so you wouldn't pay more than one fee. That's adding and or deleting. So you would essentially still pay $50 for that one change. If you were registered as a VSQG and did not generate waste during the reporting year, do we just file for a registration renewal, and what forms? As a VSQG, you do not submit reports, so you don't have to worry about that regardless of if you generate or not. But you would continue to renew your registration if you want to have an active ID, and that would be your 8700 and the DWM 7037. Are shippers considered transporters? I'm not really sure what contact shippers are here, but if they are the transporting company that moves waste from one site to the next, they are transporters. Now, for the DWM 7037, depending on what other information you have on site, we do have a transporter only activity form. So if you're not a generator and only a transporter, there is another form. If your facility is an SQG at the time of closure, but it was an LQG in previous years, which form do you submit? If at the time of closure, your registration reflects that you are an SQG, you do not have to go through the whole closure process, even if you were an LQG in previous years. That is also something that has come up in the past. Can you choose to use the e-form versus RCRA info? RCRA info for the annual report, again, is only for our large quantity generators at this time. We are working as diligently as possible to try to also opt into RCRA info for registrations and also our small quantity generators reports, but that is not where we are at this time. The last day to request invoice for payment was February 25th. If you are an LQG using RCRA info, that is the only situation where that applies. How often do plant registrations expire? Where can I look up if my facility needs updated registration? We do annually. So if you have not submitted anything, you might be expired. You might have received that letter and not realized it. So you can check your latest certificate to see what your expiration date was. And if for any reason you think you may have an out-of-date certificate, you are more than welcome to reach out to us and we can double check that for you. Or your generator status and active status is on RCRA info if you have your account there. Can we get the typo corrected? We have requested that many a times. We are at IT's leisure sometimes, so I can't fix that, unfortunately. I wanted to confirm that the biannual report can be submitted on RCRA info. And where can I find that information? Again, that RCRA info is for large quantity generators. So if you are a large quantity generator, you can submit your biannual report there. I will double check our admin section page, and if it's not there, I will make sure that that information's added. If we have new hazard waste stream in the middle of the year that wasn't anticipated when we registered in January, how long do we have? Any modifications or anything that changes at a site, regardless of what your status is, should be handled within 30 days. So you should be letting us know within 30 days of said change. If it's an owner change, a contact change, anything of the sort, you changed waste within 30 days. You should be submitting a modification for that. How do we pay with credit card if RCRA info doesn't accept payment? Again, that is where you should be requesting that electronic invoice for us if you are submitting through RCRA info. Let's see, for refugees, does RCRA info annual report option satisfy? Okay, so the RCRA info option does not include the DEP 7070 or the 7084. So your assessment return is what you should still be sending us so we know what to invoice you for. Can you reiterate what is needed to report through RCRA info versus state reporting site? I'm not exactly sure what context you need that in. But if you are using RCRA info, you upload those through flat files. Is that what you are looking for? Hopefully. But for reporting on a state level, you can still for electronically, you would use our eForm 108. And in that case, there is an option to upload the flat files, but it also is a form that you type into. And the last one I see here is, I know that as an LQG, we have to submit our annual and biannual report through RCRA info. Do we report our regular registration through eForms? No, okay, yeah, that is one thing that I mentioned. We have not gotten to the point where our registrations are through RCRA info yet. So that you would still use your eForms to submit to us. But your annual reports can go through RCRA info. Do we need to add that all facilities that are registered are in RCRA info? Now, whether you have the permissions, you may need to request those, and you can do that in RCRA info. Do you still need to submit a copy of the annual report to the judge executive? Yes, that is statute, so that has not changed. You need to make sure that you submit those to your judge executives. I do know there are some cases where they do not want that. Unfortunately, it is statute. We still have to send it to them. Or I'm sorry, you have to send that to them. We do not send them through our office. VSQGs and SQGs should only be using the eForm or paper copies. RCRA info is for LQGs. As an LQG, can we choose not to use RCRA info? That is correct. You do not have to change. That is just our preference at this time. And we are hoping to make that a requirement in the future. But right now we do have multiple options. And I do see a hand, but I have one more question before I get to you. Are there any benefits of removing waste streams? If removing a waste stream changes your generator status and you want that changed, then yes, that is a benefit for you. That may not be a benefit for everyone to do through the middle of the year. So if you are no longer generating that waste and that will change your generator status, that is possibly the only benefit, I think. Stan, do you have a question?
Yes. I'm at Fort Campbell, and we had to do state reports for Kentucky and Tennessee because of the way the post is split. Do you know what the RCRA info is gonna? Is it gonna just be one big report, or do I have to basically figure out a way to break that down for you guys and then Tennessee as well, because they're requiring it as well?
I believe that is still separate because Kentucky will have different requirements from Tennessee. So you will still have to do your report separately.
So it's broken down on what you're requiring versus what they require on the
Yes.
RCRA info? Okay.
Yeah, so when you're logged into RCRA info, what is there is our requirements. If Tennessee has separate requirements, they may have different codes and or different fields that are specific to their information only.
Okay, thank you.
For paper forms, must be a wet signature. That is correct. We do require a signature to be made on the actual form. The only times we don't require a wet signature is the electronic versions. Susan, you have a question?
Yes, and I'm sorry for not putting it in the chat, but the chat doesn't work for everybody apparently.
That is all right.
Large quantity generator will be submitting using RCRA info. I will be requesting an invoice. What concerns me is after having requested the info, does the timing of our payment correspond with whether we will be late filing or not? Because the act of making payment around here is difficult and it might not be as timely as you want it.
Yeah, that is why we try to institute that deadline. So if you know that you are using RCRA info and you need that invoice, the sooner you request it, the better. But the absolute last day to request that will be the 25th so that you can pay it before March 1st.
Okay, so it absolutely has to be paid before March 1st.
Yes, so I'm doing my best to make sure that we work around everything, with all the changes we constantly have. So with the option for electronic payment, knowing that it takes at least one overnight for us to have it available for you to even see it. That's why we're instituting that deadline to request. Now, once you request it and it's created, you will still have those few days to get that paid in between. But that's why we have a cutoff of if it's not requested by this date, we know that you won't have it paid in time.
Okie dokie, thank you.
Of course. Really quick, where can you find your facility registration expiration date on your certificate? So if you do not have a certificate that you can reference, you can reach out to our office and we can provide that information to you. But it should be on your certificate. For future, when RCRA info is required, can we request and include registration and ability to pay via credit card? It seems to be only benefit in choosing eForms for me. We are working with RCRA info staff to see how we can do that. RCRA info is a federal program, so with them having to monitor all states, accepting payments is not an option. However, we can tailor a lot of the information requested by RCRA info, such as the assessment and things like that. We can tailor that to what we're looking for to make it simpler, but the payment will still have to come directly through us because state versus federal, that will not work. I have had that discussion with that staff. So unfortunately, that will not likely change. If you submit via RCRA, do you still have to physically mail in the DEP 7070? You can either email that to your reviewer if you know who that is, or you can mail that in when requesting your invoice, or if you're sending a check. You don't have to pay electronically at all. So if you're sending a check, you would make sure that you mail that DEP 7070 with the check, or if I'm sorry, looked at a different question. Yeah, so if you are emailing that to us, and we can then create the invoice for you with the information on that DEP 7070. Will there be a training, or is there one available to navigate eForms? At this time, I do not believe we have anything planned, but I am always available for troubleshooting and working through some of the questions you might have. And I do see where Allison put that there is something that navigates setting up eForms, but specifically for our eForm, there is no training available, but there is a training on how to navigate eForms available through ECAP.
All right. Thank you so much, Justina. I think that's it for questions.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. And I really hope that you all got something useful out of it and we can have a successful report year.
Yeah, I think this was a pretty huge success and helpful to a lot of people. Thank you so much. All right, let's see here. Just gonna pop up. Quick reminder that we have some upcoming other ECAP recaps that are going to be coming up in the next couple of months. Keep an eye on our website for that. But also just feel free to contact ECAP at our helpline number or our email there. One of us will get back to you as soon as we can, or direct you to somebody who can help you out a little bit better. But thank you all so much for attending and making this a great recap to start off the year with. Really appreciate everybody. And we will again be sending out a follow-up email before the end of the week with a copy of this recording as well as the presentation from Justina, so that if you guys need to reference that, you're welcome to. Thank you all so much.